Hello and welcome to the Standardisation webinar for Level 2 Technical Certificate in Animal Care. My name is Alison Atkinson, and in the room today with me is Sarah Cox, who's the Assistant Principal Moderator for the Level 2 Animal Care Technical Qualifications.
Hello. Before we begin, I'd like to highlight the lines of support for all technical qualifications. There are a range of guidance documents found on the City and Guilds website under the Technicals tab. Secondly, the moderation support team will give you email or phone support, and these details will be at the end of the webinar. And finally, many vocational areas have technical advisors who will visit your centre to give face-to-face support. City and Guilds have recently produced some bite-sized webinars which give generic guidance, but today we aim to give you subject-specific support using some learner work from last year's synoptic assignment in animal care. Today we will be going through some high-scoring candidate work from last year's assignment and be signposting some from a lower scoring one as a comparison. You can access this work on the website along with the associated paperwork to carry out your own marking activity in your centre. The objectives of this session are to explain the justification of marks by the Principal Moderator for last year's synoptic assignment and to highlight good practice in the use of City and Guilds documents. This webinar can be used as a standardisation activity, and this is highly recommended for anyone delivering and assessing on the animal care technical qualification. Okay, so I'd like to just confirm that we're looking at last year's synoptic assignment. So first off, let's just remind ourselves what the candidate was asked to do. The scenario at the start of the assignment brief is designed to give the candidate a little bit of background information and to put the tasks into context. In this case, the candidate was working in a rescue centre. Tasks 1A and 1B require the candidate to produce both a disease control plan and husbandry plans for their given animals. This is therefore a written task. It is important to point out here that candidates should make sure they read the section on what you must produce for marking. This will clearly state to the candidate what evidence they need to produce and will ensure that they do not miss anything out. Task 2 required the candidate to carry out husbandry tasks based on the plans they produced in Task 1. Therefore, this is a practical task, and evidence for this will be gathered by the centre markers and recorded on the practical observation form. The candidate also needs to carry out behavioural observations, recording their findings on the ethogram templates included in the assessment pack. These must then be submitted for marking. Tasks 3A and 3B are again written tasks, requiring the candidate to review their ethograms and explain the behaviours seen, relating them to how well the animals have settled into the rescue centre. And for task 3B, recommendations for the ongoing care of the animals should be made. Okay, so now let's have a look at the work produced by the higher performing candidate. Before we start, I'd just like to point out that this candidate did produce a lot of evidence during the synoptic tasks, quite possibly more than was needed. Because of this, we're not going to go through every single page, because you can look at that in your own time. Okay, so for task 1A, we can see straight away that the candidate has identified the main points of a disease control plan, including information on signs, accommodation and barrier nursing. The candidate then goes on to give more detailed information on the causes, transmission and treatment, as well as clearly identifying appropriate PPE. The candidate uses technical terminology such as direct or indirect contact and zoonotic correctly, and also explains these terms to demonstrate their understanding. Now moving on to task 1B, the candidate has produced a health check sheet for the fancy mouse with ringworm to enable recording of any symptoms. This has been labelled as task 2, but probably sits better within either 1A or 1B. Overall, in this assignment, the labelling of the tasks was a little confusing, so that's an area that could be improved for this candidate. The husbandry and care plans for both the mouse and the basilisk are comprehensive, covering the following topics: accommodation requirements, diet, health, including common diseases or issues found in the species, behaviour, handling techniques and cleaning. The daily requirements have then been summarised into a care sheet to ensure all tasks have been completed practically. Extra information such as first aid procedures and a yearly health planner is also included. The learner also relates the animal's requirements to the Animal Welfare Act 2006 and the 5 animal needs. Candidate has also included a summary of behaviours within task 2, but again this would sit better in task 3A. To accompany the assessor comments for task 2, the candidate has included completed health check forms and daily care sheets. Moving on to task 3A, the candidate has explained the type of behaviour sampling carried out and produced a bar chart of the behaviours seen. They then go on to explain normal and abnormal behaviours in each species, as well as extra information on a rehoming assessment sheet. Within task 3B, the candidate was able to make valid recommendations for the ongoing care of both species. Finally, a list of references has been included. Now, this is not necessary, and this year many of the tasks are unseen, so it would not be possible for candidates to include references. However, this does demonstrate that the candidate has gone the extra mile and has done relevant reading around the subject. So now we get to the Declaration of Authenticity. So this is a really important document. You must ensure that both the candidate and the tutor have signed this, and it must be dated after the work has actually been completed, not before. You must also make sure that you tick the box relating to additional support, so it's clear for the moderator to see if the candidate has had any extra support or not. And also, only one of these is needed per synoptic assignment, so they do not have to be completed for each task. One will be enough to upload with the whole piece of work. Now we're going to consider the practical observation, or PO form. Okay, this is a critical piece of evidence that the centre observer produces during the practical performance. If completed well, this will bring the performance to life. As you know, the moderator will not be present during the practical, so it's important that this document is as descriptive as possible. Observers should describe how well the candidate performed against each assessment objective. The band descriptors should be used as a guide when making comments, but should not be copied word for word. This helps both the marker and the moderator to allocate suitable marks. We do not need a running commentary of the actions that the candidate carried out, nor do we simply want the wording from the assessment objectives put into the PO form. So to clarify, the evidence should explain how the candidate has performed against the assessment objectives, giving some examples. A separate PO form can be completed for each practical task. However, best practice would be to summarise the candidate's practical performance onto a single PO form. These forms can be handwritten or completed electronically, but you must just ensure that the handwriting is legible, particularly when the document has been scanned in. Okay, so if we just have a little look at the practical observation form that was produced by the centre, just to remind you that AO1 is all about the candidate's recall of knowledge. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to come from their commentary, but the way that the candidate is working, whether they are actually performing the actions correctly, performing them in a logical sequence. For example, here we've highlighted the section on using gloves because that shows that the candidate has a good knowledge of health and safety when working with that animal, and also that they were confident and methodical in their working. Compare that to AO2, that's more about their understanding. So that is going to be more reliant on the candidate giving a commentary of why they are carrying out those tasks. So it isn't just about doing them in the correct order, it's having that understanding of why they're carrying them out and why they're important. Okay, so before we move on to the candidate record form, just a reminder of the importance of the practical observation form. It is vital that the information given on this differentiates between different candidates' performance, but also between different tasks, as a candidate may not perform at the same level in different practical tasks. For example, they may be stronger with exotic animals than they are with livestock. Okay, so now we move on to the candidate record form, or CRF. Again, this is a key piece of evidence. There are forms supplied in the assessment pages on the website for each qualification. Care should be taken to ensure that the marks along the top of each AO relate specifically to your qualification, as they do differ between quals. I think you'll agree with the marks awarded to this candidate, but I'd like to draw your attention to the way that the CRF has been completed. Again, like on the PO form, we need to show the moderator why or where they can find the marks. So, for example, in task 1B, we see a lot of detail, so it is good practice to signpost this on the CRF. We can see here the CRF for AO1, which shows that there were 12 marks available, which was 20% of the total marks. AO1, as we've said before, is recall of knowledge. So we're looking for recall across the breadth of the qualification in significant depth to allow the candidate to score higher marks. AO1 has been awarded 11 marks as the candidate shows a comprehensive, accurate and confident level of recall throughout all of the tasks. For example, the husbandry and care plans are comprehensive, clearly stating each animal's requirements. The candidate uses technical terminology correctly throughout the assignment and was clearly able to state what they were doing during practical tasks. The candidate could have improved by discussing nutrient groups, for example, and there are minor inaccuracies such as the temperature range for the basilisk is not ideal, although acceptable, and worming of mice was stated. If we relate this to the band descriptors, we can see that the justification comments make reference to the bands but do not copy the wording without also evidencing areas in the assignment where knowledge is shown. A lower level candidate may have only shown accurate recall in key areas, therefore lacking breadth, and may not always use correct terminology. There may also be a greater number of inaccuracies evident. Moving on to AO2, which is understanding, there are again 12 available, 20% again of the total marks. And again, we're looking at understanding from across the qualification and in sufficient depth and detail to allow the candidate to demonstrate comprehensive understanding in order to score higher marks. AO2 has been awarded 11 marks again, as the candidate does show understanding from across the qualification. This has been demonstrated by their clear explanations and justifications, including explaining the 5 animal needs in the husbandry plan, as well as linking behaviours seen to both health and welfare of the animal. The candidate demonstrated a more limited understanding with regard to the use of UVA and UVB bulbs in the basilisk accommodation, and positioning of heat lamps and thermal gradients could also have been discussed. A lower level candidate may have used a more bullet point style when responding to the brief, so would lack the ability to show deeper understanding. Explanations are likely to be brief or lacking clear justification. Recommendations for the ongoing care may be invalid or even absent. Moving on to AO3 then, this is the application of practical and technical skills. There are 18 marks available here, so 30% of the total marks. This assessment objective is looking for candidates to demonstrate high levels of skill with practical tasks and to have consistently high levels of attention to detail during these tasks. A major focus of this AO is also industry performance and timescales. Remember that candidates will also show evidence of all the other AOs when carrying out a practical activity. For AO3, this particular candidate scored 17 out of 18. The candidate demonstrated high levels of skill during practical tasks. They were fluid and practiced, working confidently and competently to industry standard and within industry timescales. They also demonstrated a high level of health and safety awareness, as well as being considerate of the animal needs. For example, when carrying out the health check for the basilisk, they used a clear tank in order to minimise stress to the animal. A minor but quite important omission of not weighing the animal led to a mark of 17 rather than 18. A candidate scoring lower here may show an adequate standard of work, but work may not be up to industry standard or the work speed may be slow. Candidates may not demonstrate confidence with both species or may struggle with certain elements of the tasks, for example, handling to perform a health check. AO4 is one of the assessment objectives that centres sometimes struggle with, and it's all about bringing it together and the candidate using all of their toolkit. Again, there are 12 marks available here, 20% of the total marks. So this AO is looking for the candidate to bring their breadth and depth of knowledge, understanding and skills together to be able to deal with new situations or adapt their practice to solve problems. This AO is examining the candidate's holistic approach to their work. Again, for AO4, this candidate scored 11 because they were clearly able to link theory to practice, as evidenced in tasks 1B and 2, where the candidate was able to make links between husbandry and both health and welfare. In practical tasks, the candidate drew on their theoretical knowledge and used this to inform the decisions made during the practical. The candidate could have improved their mark by making further links, such as between husbandry and health. For example, the use of UV bulbs and providing correct diet could have been discussed in relation to metabolic bone disease, which is a disorder commonly found in captive basilisks. A lower scoring candidate may not make the links between husbandry and the 5 animal needs, or may not relate behaviours seen in captivity to those in the wild. They may also appear to carry out tasks in isolation rather than using their theoretical knowledge to influence and inform practical tasks. Okay, so our final assessment objective is AO5, attention to detail. There are 6 marks available here, 10% of the total marks. So this AO is looking for the candidate that is consistently focused on tasks and goes as far as checking themselves afterwards or altering their practice due to feedback. For this AO, the candidate has scored a 5 due to them demonstrating a high level of attention to detail in both written and practical tasks. Written tasks have all been completed thoroughly and show evidence of planning and checking of work. In practical tasks, the candidate was able to make adjustments according to animal needs and check their work area to ensure it was left tidy on completion of tasks. Written work was not always labelled clearly or logically, meaning top marks were not awarded. Lower scoring candidates may show gaps or inaccuracies in their planning, with tasks being completed in an illogical sequence or even missing entirely. Just to draw your attention on this PO form to the blue comments. So these are comments made by the principal moderator to help clarify the awarding of the marks and clarify some of the evidence that has been found within the assignment. Okay, so I'm going to just spend some time now on some of the common pitfalls that we saw in the 2018 submissions. These have also been highlighted in another City and Guilds webinar. The centre has been given clear guidance that there must be 2 different animals allocated to learners. These 2 animals should be allocated so that it does not disadvantage their ability to access all of the marks. For example, if they're both similar animals, they cannot show their full range of skills. If the animals are challenging, it needs to be explained in the PO notes to enable the moderator to get a clear view of performance. So, for example, if the candidate is handling the animal and the animal bites them, then that is an opportunity for the candidate to show their skills, but equally we shouldn't necessarily penalise the candidate for that unless it was something that they had done. We also need to be careful with allocating nocturnal animals, as the candidates have to carry out a behavioural observation. And clearly, if they're then going to observe the animals during the day, the animals will be asleep, therefore not allowing them to observe different natural behaviours. Other examples of pitfalls were when it clearly stated tasks should be taken in order and they weren't. So this can actually disadvantage candidates as tasks are designed to follow on from each other unless clearly stated. It was also apparent in some cases that candidates were given a lot more time than the recommendations to complete tasks. So centres must ensure that they adhere to the guidelines on timings to ensure fairness across the qualification. And also, if it states that the internet cannot be used, then it shouldn't be available to candidates during their tasks. A big issue in the 2008 series was when candidates were given templates to help them complete tasks, particularly for the practicals, such as risk assessments and pro formas for the practical husbandry tasks. This must be avoided as they can limit the quality of evidence and make differentiation problematic. It is difficult to evidence candidates' understanding if they are given a tick sheet to complete, for example, when carrying out husbandry tasks. So only performers provided in the assessment pack should be used. You must make sure writing is legible and that work's scanned in a logical order, and this should be checked before uploading it to the portal. PO forms should be descriptive with notes on the quality of practical skills seen. They should be differentiating and give sufficient detail to enable the moderator to see how well the candidate performed. The marking grid should be used as a reference tool when making judgments in practicals. Remember that marks are awarded when all tasks have been completed and submitted, and PO notes which describe similar performances should be given similar marks. Candidates can perform differently to expectations. The PO note should not refer to what the candidate is usually able to do, they should only refer to what they did on the day. They can also perform differently on different days, so PO notes should encompass the mixed range of abilities within their tasks, i.e. if they did well with the cow but less well with the rabbit, this should show up and will affect their overall marks. Remember again, the evidence has to be reviewed by someone who may not have seen the assessment and who is not familiar with the centre approach or the learner. So it needs to be completely clear, coherent and comprehensive. Before we close, I'd like to point you to the support I touched on earlier. The resources specific to technicals can be found here on the City and Guilds website, along with the contact details for moderation support team. I would also like to draw your attention specifically to the qualification report, which details the data coming out of results last year, along with hints on how to avoid some of the pitfalls that centres may have fallen into in the 2018 series. It includes narrative on the synoptic assignment along with the 2 external exams, and I'm sure you will find this very helpful. This report will be available shortly on the website. I'd like to close this webinar now and say thank you to everyone for your time. I hope this has been helpful, and good luck.